Spending on federal election campaigns could be capped as the Albanese government seeks to rush through new donation laws. The overhaul is designed to limit the impact of wealthy donors like Clive Palmer from bankrolling campaigns. Political donations would be limited to $20,000 per candidate each year. Candidates would also face spending caps, likely set around $800,000 each and $90 million in total. The government has been working behind the scenes to secure coalition support in a bid to bypass minor parties and independents.
This is designed to take big money out of Australian politics. We're not targeting individuals, we're targeting the system that allows an uncapped amount of money to be spent on elections.
Independent MPs are unhappy, accusing the two major parties of doing a deal to protect their own interests.
A third of Australians voted for candidates other than the two major parties, and what we're seeing the major parties do is try and entrench incumbency, to stitch it up so that we have this system of two parties when Australians are increasingly saying, hey, we want a third way, we want a third alternative.
And joining us with more on this is the independent member for Curtin, Kate Chaney. Kate, appreciate your time. Thank you. Just expand for us on those comments we heard from the Senator David Pocock there about entrenching incumbency. How do you expect these changes would impact independent candidates in particular trying to win a seat in the parliament?
So I recognise that we absolutely need better transparency. And we probably need a donation cap so individuals can't have too much impact on politics. But once you get into a spending cap, it's very complicated and it's not a level playing field. So it means that the parties and incumbents have an advantage. They've got an office and staff and a communications budget. So for a new challenger, they don't have any of those things. And it looks like under this framework, ads that advertise the party rather than the individual are not included in that cap. So that's not fair. And public funding embeds the two major parties too, because it's based on how many votes you got at the last election. So we're asking taxpayers to pay more for political campaigns. So rather than actually getting the big money out of politics, this bill is guaranteeing the big money to the parties.
OK, so that's the problem clearly outlined there when it comes to the spending caps. What about donation caps? As I mentioned, donations will be limited to $20,000 per candidate each year. What sort of level of contributions would you see as appropriate?
Well, I think we can have a discussion about what that number is, but it's not the biggest issue in the bill. And 20,000, I mean, personally, I think that's probably pretty reasonable. Others will have different views on that. But it's the spending caps that are the problem. And I think if lots of people in your community want to give you money so that you can run a campaign, why shouldn't you be able to spend that money on a campaign? So if we dealt with transparency and a donation cap, then I don't think we need the spending cap. And we don't need more public funding. We don't need the public to be paying more for political campaigns.
In his announcement about this today, the Special Minister of State, Don Farrell, said this would actually strengthen democracy. He said today, and I'll quote here, the Australian electoral system should not work on the basis that the only people who can be elected into Parliament are people who are sponsored by billionaires. Isn't that fair enough? Don't you think there is cause for concern when candidates are indebted, essentially, to wealthy individuals?
Absolutely, and transparency and donation caps would fix that. What he's not saying is the way he thinks it should work is the only people who can be elected into Parliament are the major parties. And we're seeing the declining support for the major parties, and instead of providing better leadership, they want to change the rules to prevent future competition. And I think that Australian voters deserve better than that.
When it comes to major donors, there is a real concern about the impact they have on individual members of Parliament once they reach that spot in the Parliament. When it comes to your own personal situation, when you got Climate 200 donations at the last election via Simon Holmes à Court, how much contact do you then have with someone like Mr Holmes à Court through your term of government? Do you communicate with him regularly?
Look, very little, certainly not on policy issues. And Climate 200 was 13,000 donors. Simon Holmes à Court put in 2% of that money, but seems to get a lot of credit and is seen as some sort of puppet master. We don't really have discussions on policy issues. I still accept Climate 200 support in relation to campaigning because I think there is this really uneven playing field and it's very difficult to fight the big party system. And I think voters are showing that they want that. Communities want to have more than a choice between two parties when it comes to how they're represented. And it would be a real shame to see this legislation rushed through Parliament without the scrutiny it deserves when we're fundamentally changing who gets to be in Parliament.
Would you welcome Climate 200 formalising itself as a political party to get access to the sorts of benefits that you alluded to earlier that the major parties would get?
Look, I've got no idea what Climate 200's plans are or if it wants to be a political party or whatever else. It's not really my decision. It doesn't have anything to do with me, really. What I'm interested in is making sure that competition continues to be possible in politics. And I'm now an incumbent. I have some of those incumbency advantages, but for communities who want to be represented differently, they will be locked out from doing that if we see this change, so that instead of candidates having to find supporters, if they're part of a major party, they just get taxpayer money. They can make a profit in some electorates where they don't spend any money, but then they get a bunch of votes, and then they get, under this, they get $5 for each of those votes. And then they can take that profit and spend it in contestable electorates to outspend new challengers. And I don't think that's fair.
These reforms wouldn't kick in until after the next federal election. I'm reliably informed your main competition in the seat of Curtin, the Liberal Tom White, is doing very well on the fundraising front. As you know, there are many Liberal supporters with very deep pockets based in your electorate. How worried are you about your ability to hold on to what is, of course, a traditionally blue ribbon seat? The margin last time around, as we know, was incredibly tight.
Yeah, and definitely we're seeing a lot of spending. And what we're seeing is the Liberal Party is trying to win back seats like mine with money, not with policy. But it takes more than money. And I think it's all about volunteers and community support. And you know, it's not, you can't just write a cheque and buy an election. And we saw that Clive Palmer got very little for his $100 million. We'll see that again, but seeing all that, we will never know how much money my opponent is spending at the moment because there is zero transparency. I put every donation on my website in real time, and I think every politician should have to do that.
Independent MP Kate Chaney, really